All right. Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Could somebody just type in the chat really quickly? I just want to make sure I'm not going to be talking to myself, which I'm not opposed to doing, but it won't really help anybody. Okay, cool. Thank you, Blaine. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in to listen to me. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Taylor Atkinson. I am the Interim Director over at the library. I've been here since 2017, and I was the Assistant Director from April 2017 until just a couple of months ago when I became the Interim Director. So I'm very happy to be here. I am a USC graduate, two-time USC graduate actually. So I have my bachelor's in religious studies from USC Columbia, and then I earned my master's in library and information science from USC Columbia as well in 2015. So happy to be here, and let's dive into what I like to call fake news blues, or how to spot misinformation and learn how to use credible sources. So let's dive in. You guys are the research club. I know that this first slide is going to be preaching to the choir, so to speak, but I thought just for the sake of getting everybody on the same page, we would kind of review the research process. So there are different steps that people take. Some plans I've seen use 5 steps, some use 7, some use 10. But I think I've kind of managed to summarize the general outline of what we call the research process. So step 1, right, you're going to identify and you're going to develop your topic. Step 2, you'll start finding background information. Step 3, you're going to locate materials, so things like books, media, periodicals, internet sources. Hopefully in step 3, you're going to be using the library. In step 4, you're going to be evaluating your sources. And then steps 5 and 6, I like to call write and cite. So write and cite. And again, this is where some people do things a little bit differently. They might add in other steps, like step 7 could be proofread, for example. But this is just a general outline of the research process. And today we're really going to be focusing on step 4, so evaluating your sources. Now there's a lot of different methods that you can use to evaluate sources. Some of them have really cool or funny acronyms, and this one you'll see in a couple of slides is my favorite. I can't wait to dive in. So when we're talking about the research process in general, we're talking about evaluating sources, we get into a concept that in the library science world, we call information literacy. So some of you may be familiar with this concept, but I'll kind of go over information literacy. And so the typical definition comes from ACRL, which is the Association of College and Research Libraries. So they define information literacy as a set of integrated abilities encompassing the reflective discovery of information, the understanding of how information is produced and valued, and the use of information in creating new knowledge and participating ethically in communities of learning. That is a lot of academic words, so we're going to break it down a little bit on this slide and the next one. So if you have information literacy skills, if you're an information literate student, then there are 5 different competencies that you can fulfill. So the first one, the information literate student can determine the extent of your information that's needed. Number 2, you can access needed information effectively and efficiently, i.e. you know how to search the library catalog to look for books. You know how to search in journals or databases to find articles that you need. Our third competency, the information literate student can evaluate information and its sources critically, the keyword there is critically, and can incorporate selected information into your knowledge base. Number 4, the information literate student can use that information they've learned effectively to accomplish a specific purpose, i.e. write a research paper or do a project. And number 5, the information literate student understands many of the economic, legal, and social issues surrounding the use of information, and you can access that information ethically and legally. So that means looking out for things like copyright, right? Or we're not going to plagiarize. That's what competency 5 means. Like I said, this is a lot of academic words. So in other words, what does this mean? I really like this definition, that information literacy is a set of competencies to effectively and efficiently find, use, manage, and communicate information. So not just for educational, we're not just talking about your classes or your work at USC Union. It goes beyond that. It goes into workforce readiness, and it's even in your everyday life. And information literacy can be described as the ability to locate, evaluate, manage, use information from a variety of sources for problem solving, decision making, and research. All right, so again, I know that's a lot of heavy academia terms being thrown at you. So how do we combine information literacy as part of the research process? Look at this second blurb here, which I think really summarizes it well. So we've just talked about the research process, right? So in our research process, you define the information need, you start formulating your topic, you develop a search strategy, you execute your search strategy, and you use the results to write a paper, do a project, right? The information literacy component of that will help you recognize when information is needed and will help you figure out how to locate, access, critically evaluate. Again, the key word there is critically evaluate, communicate, and use that information effectively. But the big question here, right, is how do we critically evaluate sources? Here is where my favorite acronym comes in. So there are multiple methods, like I said, that you can use to evaluate sources, different acronyms. This one's my favorite. This one is called the CRAP test, which, yes, CRAP test. It's pretty easy to remember. I don't think you'll forget it. And I'm a little partial to it because it was developed actually by a team of librarians at California State University. So here is the CRAP test. First, our C, which stands for currency. We're going to look at the timeliness of the info. Our R is for relevant. So how does this information fit your needs? Authority. Our first A, we'll look at the source of the information. Our second A is accuracy. So what is the reliability? How correct is this information? And then last but not least, our P is the purpose. So why does this information exist? And here are some great questions to ask ourselves when we're looking at a source, and it'll help us evaluate. So again, our C, currency. So when was this information published? When was it posted if you found it online? Has this information been revised? Has it been updated? Is the information current or out of date for your topic? Depending on the topic, especially if it's something that we would call like a hot button topic that is very accurate and relevant to today, there are new resources and information all the time. So if you're picking something that's 10 years old, it's probably not going to be current. It's going to be out of date. And then if it's an internet source, are the links on that page functional? So our R for relevance. Does this information relate to your topic? Does it answer your research question? Who is the intended audience? Is the information at an appropriate level? So it's not too elementary, not too advanced. Is this a legitimate source for you? Have you looked at a variety of sources before determining this is one you'll use? We're not going to do a search and simply click on and use the first article that we find, right? You might bookmark it and kind of keep it in the back of your mind, make notes about it, We're going to look at other sources before going back to that one. And then, would you be comfortable using this source for a research paper? If you're not sure about it, I would tend to not use it. So our first A, our authority. So we need to look at who is the author, or if there's not a specific author listed, who is the publisher, where is this coming from, who is the sponsor, because if it's someone who's a sponsor, then they've paid for this information to be put out there, and anytime that happens, a sponsor can have a specific or certain agenda, so they want you to read it. If there's an author, are their credentials or their organizational affiliation, like a college, a university, a company, are those listed? What are their qualifications to write on this topic? Do they have a degree in the subject? Do they have work experience? Have they published other articles or books or whatever on the topic previously? Is their contact information, such as the publisher information or an email address? Sometimes authors themselves will list their contact info, like their organizational email address, on an article. And then lastly, don't overlook this, does the URL itself reveal anything about the author or the source? So some examples, we all know .com, which is commercial. Again, that could mean that somebody is trying to sell you something. .edu, which is educational. So for example, that's USC Union's website is .edu. .gov is US government. .org, which is the library's website, unionlibrary.org, means that it's likely a nonprofit organization. Or .net, which is a network organization. So the URL itself can be very telling as to the legitimacy, the relevance, the authority of the source. And when we're talking about authority, there's one topic I want to mention that I get asked about a lot, and that is Wikipedia. I know there's several professors in here, so y'all might be rolling your eyes at me when I bring up Wikipedia. So I know that it was ingrained in my mind when I was a student to not ever use Wikipedia, right? Because it can be edited by anybody at any time. It's essentially what you call open source. So I could create a Wikipedia account and become an editor and go in and edit articles. So a lot of folks just write off Wikipedia completely. But I tend to have a little bit of an opposing opinion, and I'll tell you why. I think Wikipedia is a really great place to start when you're researching a topic. Wikipedia can often give you, great general overviews to help you determine, hey, is this something that I want to continue researching? But the best part about Wikipedia is that they have to cite their sources. If a fact has been given and the source is not cited at the bottom of the page in the bibliography, and there will be a little bracket there that will tell you, needs citation, needs more information. And so while if I was writing a paper, I'm not going to directly cite Wikipedia, I'm going to go down to that bibliography that's at the bottom of the Wikipedia page, and I'm going to go to the original source that Wikipedia pulled from. So that's just my 2 cents on authority and Wikipedia, for example. So moving on to our second A, we have accuracy, which talks about, again, remember, the reliability, truthfulness, and correctness of the content. So we need to ask, where is this information coming from? Is the information supported by evidence? Are there citations? Or is this just a blog or an article where a person is expressing their opinions? Has this information been reviewed or refereed? AKA, has it been peer reviewed, like a lot of journals and other periodicals are? Can you verify any of the information in another source? Again, this kind of goes back to my thing about Wikipedia. Wikipedia, you can do a lot of cross-checking. So cross-checking is something that's very important. If you found a source that you think is very legitimate, and you try to find other information about the same topic and you cannot find anything, so that means there is only this one source that is saying this, that's a big red flag for you. Does the language or tone of the writing seem biased and free of emotion? And lastly, are there spelling, grammatical, or other typographical errors? Also a big red flag. And then our last letter, our P, is the purpose. So again, the purpose is the reason that this information exists. So what is the purpose? Is it to inform? Is it to teach you? Is it to sell something to you, whether that's a concept, a product, an idea? Is it simply meant to be entertaining? Or is it there to persuade you? Do the authors or sponsors, the publisher, whoever, do they make their intentions or purpose clear? Do you think this information is factual? Is it an opinion? Again, like a blog. Is it propaganda? Does that POV, that point of view, appear objective and impartial? Again, that goes back to our accuracy. Does the language or tone seem biased and free of emotion? And then, are there any obvious political, ideological, cultural, religious, institutional, or personal biases? And we'll talk more about biases in a minute. So that's just a good breakdown of the CRAP test. Again, my favorite. And here, if you look online there, you can find numerous different, what they call CRAP checklists. This is one that I found. That source is listed there. It's a LibGuide from another library. And this is something that can be really helpful if the CRAP test is new to you, if you are trying to get into the habit of evaluating information critically. Eventually, it will become like second nature to you. It's just something that you're automatically going to do. But when I first started researching, I actually had to do something like this. I followed a method that's very similar to this, and I would truly print out this sheet. And if anybody wants me to send this to them, I'm happy to do so, or I'm happy to create another one. And when I would go to the Thomas Cooper Library at USC Columbia, I would truly print out a copy of something like this for every source I would use for a paper, and I would evaluate it. And it might seem a little tedious and it might seem a little extra, but there would be times that there would be a source that I thought seemed legitimate. And when I really sat down and I asked myself these questions, I realized, not so much. Let me find something else. So again, this is just one example of this checklist. There are numerous others online that you can use. Does anybody have any questions about the CRAP test or CRAP checklist or anything before we move on? Awesome. All right, we'll keep going. My citation got cut off, but I promise I did cite my source. So we'll move on a little bit to that kind of buzzword that we hear, which is fake news. And because this is an election year, I feel like this is something we're inundated with a lot, is the concept of fake news. And I wanted to dive a little bit more specifically into that because fake news is part of the umbrella of information literacy. And so to clarify, fake news is not news that you simply disagree with. An actual definition of fake news is that it seems to mimic legitimate news media content in form, but they don't follow the same processes or intent. So fake news tends to spread a lot of misinformation, false information, or what we call disinformation, which is purposely spread to deceive people. So what can you do? I'm sorry for the formatting. I think when it was converting, it kind of messed things up a little bit, but we'll try to follow along. So what are some things you can do to help start recognizing fake news sites? So things that I try to do on a basis is just to be curious and to actively investigate news stories. Try to use news sources that are accountable for their content and follow what we call journalistic ethics and standards. This is one of the biggest and can often be the toughest to do, is what they call to use care before sharing. So pause and reflect. So if you read something from a news source that gives you strong emotions, whether that is a positive emotion or a negative emotion, just take a minute and pause and reflect before you react or before you share with others. And then one of the toughest things to do is to learn and recognize your own biases and how to compensate for them. So there's a really great project called Project Implicit. Some of you may have heard of. It's done by Harvard. And you can go to that link there, or again, I'm just sending it to you. And you can take a series of tests to help you learn if you have biases regarding tons of different topics. So I just listed a few of them there: disability, sexuality, age, race, gender. There's a test to see if you have biases against weapons, for example. It's a very long list, and these are pretty quick, really simple tests that you can take that will help show you whether or not you have a bias for or against a certain topic. You can't begin to compensate for your biases until you recognize them, and sometimes recognizing them is the hardest step. And then the last thing we can do is fact check. One of my favorite phrases is trust but verify. And as a librarian, this is something that I follow daily. So I like to independently do my own research and to verify. I don't take what people say or what I read, whether that's in the media, social media, at face value. So there are multiple websites, things like factcheck.org and the very popular Snopes.com that you can use to kind of help you independently verify and fact check information. So speaking of biases, again, we as individuals have our own biases, but so does the media. And this is something that you might have seen in some version before. I see it circulated on social media every once in a while. It can be a little bit confusing. So again, this is a look at some of the biggest, most popular media organizations. So in that middle column, this is what has been determined to be neutral. So they don't skew left, they don't skew right, they're the most neutral. Towards the top of the chart, you can see on that left, so like AP, Reuters, Bloomberg, they are neutral and they do original fact reporting. Down at the very, very bottom, you see on the bottom left, everything down there contains inaccurate or fabricated information. So this is very helpful. I can tell you offhand, there are several media organizations on here that I regularly look at, but I might not have pinpointed them exactly where they are on this chart. And again, I think that's largely because as a person, I have my own biases, right? And so it's nice to see an outside perspective for you to get a better personal idea of these are neutral sources I can use. So some more things, 5 different ways we can help spot fake news. Our first one is pretty obvious, so look for unusual URLs. If they end with that I-O, or if it's .com, .co, or another couple of letters behind there, chances are they're not legitimate. Second thing we can do, we can look at the layout. So we can, again, look at that accuracy from the CRAP test. Remember, we can look for grammatical errors, if they're incorrect dates. Are they doing bold claims with no sources, which we also like to call clickbait, or sensationalist images? These are all really big red flags. Number 3, that dig deeper. Again, trust but verify. Don't necessarily take what you read at face value. So find out who wrote this article, who wrote this source, and who supports this site. Number 4, my favorite, to cross-check. So use fact-checking. Remember, factcheck.org, snopes.com. Do your own research and confirm information. And see if there are other news outlets who are reporting the same or similar news. And then last, this is one of my favorites, try a reverse image search, which you can do on Google or other websites. So if that same picture appears in other unrelated stories, then you might have a reason to be suspicious, right? So a lot of times, if it's a sensationalist image, we will reuse it and again for that clickbait, right? So a picture might be in an article from 2020, but the original picture is from another event that happened 5 years ago. You wouldn't know that unless you independently verified, looked at other news sources, or did something like this reverse image search. Here's some more great graphics from IFLA, which I really love. That is the International Federation of Library Associations. Excuse me, guys. So they do some great graphics about spotting fake news. Again, this really aligns with our CRAP test, so I just kind of want to drill it in. So consider our source, read beyond, avoid bait. Do some research on the author, or if there's not an author, the publisher, the sponsor. Are there any supporting sources? Is there a bibliography listed? Are there works cited? Check the date. Sometimes that can be really tricky. It might seem like it's something that is new, relevant, current from 2020, but it's actually several years old. That happens very frequently. Is it a joke? If it's too outlandish, it might be satire. When I think of satire, I think of websites like The Onion, for example, which is a lot of fun, but all too frequently I've seen on social media folks share articles from The Onion as if that is an actual news story, not realizing that the purpose of it is to be satire. Again, we want to check our own biases. And then my favorite, ask the expert. So ask a librarian like me, or consult one of those fact-checking sites that we've mentioned. And IFLA did really great, and they actually released another How to Spot Fake News graphic this year, but it's the COVID-19 edition. You'll see there's a lot of crossover, but they've added some new things like, do others agree? Again, so are any other sites reporting this? Are they citing sources? What are those sources? And then look before you share. Again, we want to pause, we want to reflect. Don't share posts or stories that you haven't checked out. Trust but verify. So you might think, why does all of this matter? And obviously it's going to matter to you right now when you're a USC Union student and you're going to be honing in on your information literacy skills while you're in college. But information literacy is something that you actually will use in your everyday life, whether you realize it or not. And I looked at a couple of different studies that I thought were really interesting, specifically related to information literacy and employers and the workforce. And this first finding up here comes from Library and Information Research. So it's based on a study they did. And they found that employers would like graduates to be comprehensive research, researchers, excuse me, but they often make hiring decisions simply based on a cursory assessment of an applicant's information seeking skills. So what they're saying is your information seeking skills matter, and that's something that you might not consciously think about, but that's something that employers are going to be able to suss out in interviews with you. And this is kind of detailed upon on this second blurb here, which comes from Hart Research Associates. They conducted research, and their findings are called "It Takes More Than a Major." So they found that nearly all of their employers they surveyed, so 93%, agreed that a candidate's demonstrated capacity to think critically, communicate clearly, and solve complex problems is actually more important than their undergraduate major. And then our last example comes from an article from the Chronicle of Higher Education. Many employers said their fresh from college hires frequently lack deeper and more traditional skills in research and analysis. Instead, the new workers default to quick answers plucked from the internet, which might be fine if you're looking up a definition or a quick fact, but for many tasks, it proves superficial and incomplete. So I will say I am the first person to go to Google. Google is my default, especially as a librarian. But again, the things that we've talked about today, we're looking at information literacy as a whole. The goal is for you to hone in your information literacy skills so that, again, you're not just taking things at face value. You are able to critically look and examine sources for yourself, so you're able to do that deeper level of thinking. And again, let's think of everyday examples. So 2020 is an election year. Information literacy is so important when it comes to politics. And 2020 is even more of a year for information literacy because of COVID-19. Again, since March, there has been so much information. We've just been inundated with information about COVID-19, among other things. And it can be really difficult to sort through to see what is legitimate, where the source is, where this is coming from. I know that I personally do a lot of cross-checking, a lot of my trust but verify mantra, and it can be difficult, but hopefully this has helped you maybe learn some more about information literacy and given you, with the CRAP test, ways to work on your information literacy skills. But I'm happy to answer any questions, and this is my email address, tatkinson@unionlibrary.org. Y'all are welcome to email me anytime. I'm also at the library, which is open on Mondays and Wednesdays from 8:30 to 5, and then Thursday afternoons from 1 to 5. So y'all are also welcome to stop in and see me or send me an email. And thank you, Jen. I like it too. I probably use it a little bit too much, but I would rather verify on my own. But I'm happy to answer any questions, and if there aren't any, I just want to thank you all for being here. I don't know, my friends and family might think it's too much. They're like, why don't you just believe me? I'm like, well, I'm a librarian, so sorry. Ooh, what's a hand? I don't know what that means. And I don't know where Randy is either.
Okay, the hand is usually means somebody has a question.
It does, Jen does.
And probably she wants to.
How can I let her talk?
Well, she should be able to unmute.
Okay.
Okay, and I was just figuring out where to unmute because apparently I'm brain dead, so I apologize, y'all.
You're fine.
So, I mean, it's less of a question and more of just, if you don't mind me just kind of adding a little something, because this was amazing information, and so well put together, and you couldn't have been right about more than any of this. It was just amazing. Thank you so much, and it's very necessary at this time. And I think that looking at it as especially somebody that may be hearing this kind of information for the first time, it may seem overwhelming, but once you get into it and just like anything, make a sort of routine out of it, it really all becomes a sort of second nature. You don't even realize that you're doing half of it. It just becomes something that you do. And I really feel like you can even look at something sometimes and not have to do that sort of investigating. You just know already by some of the verbiage that may be used, or you may see an image and be like, that's not the appropriate image for that. You start to kind of piece stuff together on your own the more that you do it, the more that you practice it. So it may seem like it's a huge process, and maybe it is on the front end, but it's something that pays dividends in the end.
I agree. I mean, that's really well said, Jen. Or, you'll look at, there are certain sources, whether it's a media source or otherwise, that I just automatically discount. Because I know for a fact, having done something like the crap test on their sources before, that it's never going to pass that test. And so I just automatically discount it, and I won't use it as a resource. And that's why I really love, like I said before, this crap checklist, which again, it seems so obvious. It's like, why do I have to do this? But like Jen is saying, the more that you do it, then the more you're going to, kind of ingrain it, store it in your long-term memory, and then it is going to become that second nature. And Lee, I'm so happy. I feel like professors usually just really roll their eyes and they're like, why do you talk about Wikipedia? So it's really great to hear somebody else be all for it. But I mean, I agree. It's a great place to start. I am not going to cite it in a paper or project or in my research. And like Lee said, controversial topics, you might need to be a little more cautious, because especially if it's something that is currently controversial, if it's something that is ongoing. So if it's an event that has just happened, or even something like the 2020 election, to use an ongoing current event, because it's something that is happening in the moment, you might want to be a little wary, a little bit cautious, because that information is constantly changing and constantly being updated. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
Taylor, do you know if this is going to be available so we could have students in our classes watch this?
I think Randy said it was going to be recorded.
Okay.
And PowerPoint too.
That's always cool. That's always helpful.
Yeah, I can definitely send that out.
Okay, Randy says it's recording. So yeah, if we have some access in some place, that means if I have students do a research paper, I can also have them watch you first.
Yay!
And
you'll always send them my way. As a librarian, I love doing this. This is something I do on a daily basis, and I actually really enjoy doing it, and really enjoyed about it too.
Yeah, I finally just got off this other call, so it was supposed to end at 3, and it just ended now. Yeah, this is recording, and I'll email the link to the recording out to the campus as well. So everybody can have that too.
Awesome. Do you want me to just send you the PowerPoint so you can send that out too?
Sure, yeah, attach that too. That'd be good.
Okay. I'll do that.
They got
Anything else?
anything else? All right, cool. Well, thank you, Taylor.
Yeah,
Thank you, Taylor. This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Taylor. Again, this was really great.